The battlefield was silent now. Smoke still rose from the destroyed machines, and broken weapons lay scattered across the lifeless ground. The war had moved on, leaving behind only ruins, wreckage, and the forgotten. Among the wreckage, a small figure lay motionless. A little alien girl, Aya, barely 6 years old, was curled up near a collapsed building. Her thin, pale blue skin was covered in dust, and a deep wound on her leg bled slowly. Her large, violet eyes stared at the sky, unblinking. She had cried until no more tears came. Now she just lay there, waiting for the end. Her people had fled. Her parents had told her to run, but she had fallen behind. Then the enemy attacked, and everything became fire and screaming. When the battle ended, she had searched for her family, but there was no one left. For hours she had called for help, but no one came. Now she had no strength left. Her small body ached, her head felt heavy, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. Shadows moved in the ruins, hunters searching for anything still alive. She heard distant growls and the sound of claws on metal. If she stayed here, she would not see another sunrise. Then heavy footsteps approached. Aya closed her eyes, expecting another enemy, another monster. But the footsteps were different, strong, steady, and slow. A shadow fell over her, blocking the dim light from the burning wreckage. A tall figure in gray armor stood above her, holding a large weapon. His helmet had a dark visor, hiding his face. The armor was scratched and covered in dust, but he stood firm, like an unshaken mountain. He was not one of her people. He was something far more terrifying. A human soldier. Aya had heard the stories. Humans were warriors, fighters without fear. Some said they never gave mercy, that they only knew battle. She tried to move, to crawl away, but her body refused to listen. The soldier knelt beside her, placing his weapon on his back. His armored hands reached for her. Aya squeezed her eyes shut, trembling. But instead of pain, she felt something strange. Warmth. The soldier gently touched her shoulder. His voice, though deep, was calm. "You're hurt." Aya didn't understand the words, but the tone was soft, not threatening. She opened her eyes slowly, staring at him. The soldier removed his helmet, revealing a human face with short dark hair and tired brown eyes. His expression was not cruel, it was concerned. Aya had never seen a human up close before. She expected something terrifying, but there was only a man looking at her with kindness. She whimpered, trying to pull away, but he raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. He pulled a small metal box from his belt and pressed a button. It opened with a soft click, revealing medical supplies. "Easy now," he said, cutting a piece of cloth and pressing it against her bleeding leg. Aya flinched but didn't cry out. The soldier worked carefully, wrapping a bandage around the wound. His touch was firm but careful, like someone used to treating wounds in battle. Aya didn't know what to think. Humans were supposed to be dangerous, but this one was helping her. A sharp howl echoed through the ruins, and Aya's small hands gripped the soldier's arm in fear. The sound came from the scavenger creatures hunting the battlefield. They had caught her scent. The soldier tensed, eyes scanning the darkness. He quickly lifted Aya, holding her close as he reached for his weapon. She was too weak to resist. Instead, she buried her face against his armored chest, shaking. The soldier turned, moving swiftly through the ruins, his footsteps silent despite his heavy armor. Aya could hear his heart beating steady and strong beneath the metal. Another howl came, closer this time. The creatures were coming. Aya had lost hope hours ago. She had believed she would die here, alone and forgotten. But now, a human soldier, her people's supposed enemy, was carrying her to safety. For the first time since the battle, a small flicker of hope sparked in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she was not alone anymore. Sergeant David Carter moved quickly through the ruins, carrying the fragile alien girl in his arms. She was light, too light, like a wounded bird barely clinging to life. Her small fingers gripped his armor, her breathing weak but steady. The battlefield was dangerous, even after the fighting had ended. Scavenger beasts roamed the wreckage, hunting anything still alive. They could smell blood, and the little girl, Aya, was bleeding. David had found injured soldiers before. Some could be saved, others couldn't. That was war. But this girl, she was just a child. His orders were clear: avoid unnecessary risks. Helping an alien, especially a young one, was not part of his mission. His team was already evacuated, leaving him behind to scout for any survivors. He had planned to leave soon, but now things had changed. Aya let out a small whimper, shifting in his arms. She was barely awake, her violet eyes flickering open for a moment. When she saw his face, she didn't pull away. She was afraid, but not of him. David had fought against her kind before. He had been trained to see them as enemies. But this girl, she wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a threat. A low growl echoed through the ruins. David's grip on his rifle tightened. He turned, eyes scanning the shadows. The scavenger beasts had caught their scent. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. Then another, and another. The creatures were hungry. David cursed under his breath. He adjusted his hold on Aya, pressing her close to his chest. She made a weak sound but didn't struggle. He could feel her warmth through his armor. The first creature stepped forward, a four-legged beast with sharp fangs and matted fur. Its long claws scraped against the broken ground as it snarled. More followed, circling him like wolves surrounding prey. David didn't hesitate. Bang! A single shot rang out, striking the first beast in the head. It collapsed instantly. The others snarled but didn't retreat. David stepped back, his mind racing. Too many. Wasting ammo here was a bad idea. He needed to move. With a deep breath, he turned and ran. The creatures howled and gave chase. David's boots pounded against the metal wreckage as he weaved through broken vehicles and shattered buildings. Aya's small body trembled in his arms, but she held onto him, trusting him completely. A ruined structure loomed ahead. The collapsed bunker, partially buried under debris. It wasn't much, but it could work. David jumped over a fallen beam, his muscles burning. Behind him, claws scraped the ground, getting closer. Almost there. He slid into the bunker's entrance, nearly crashing into the wall. Dust filled the air. He turned, lifting his rifle. Bang, bang, bang. 3 more shots. 3 more bodies fell. The remaining creatures hesitated, growling in frustration. David didn't wait for them to change their minds. He pulled a metal bar from a broken door and jammed it against the entrance. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would give him time to think. The bunker was dark and filled with old supplies. He set Aya down gently against the wall, kneeling beside her. She was shivering, her breathing unsteady. She needed help. Now, David grabbed his med kit and opened it, pulling out a small injector. It contained a healing agent designed for humans, but it might work on her. He hesitated, looking at her delicate frame. "All right, kid," he muttered. "This might sting." He pressed the injector against her arm. Aya flinched, letting out a small cry, but then her breathing steadied. The medicine was working. David sighed, leaning back against the wall. He ran a hand through his short, sweat-dampened hair. What now? His comm device was damaged. No signal. No backup. He was alone on an enemy planet, stuck in a ruined bunker, babysitting an alien child. This was not how today was supposed to go. Aya shifted slightly, her large violet eyes blinking up at him. She was still weak, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She whispered something in her language, soft, tired words he didn't understand. But he understood her look. She was thanking him. David sighed, shaking his head. Yeah, don't thank me yet, kid. We're not out of this mess." Aya didn't reply. She just watched him, her small hands resting on his arm. David had been a soldier for years. He had seen destruction, loss, and cruelty. But in this moment, with this tiny alien girl looking at him like he was her only hope, he knew he couldn't leave her behind. No matter what it cost him. David Carter sat against the cold metal wall of the bunker, his rifle resting on his knee. His heart was still racing from the chase, but he forced himself to stay calm. Outside, the scavenger beasts growled and scratched at the entrance, their hunger making them relentless. Aya, the little alien girl, was curled up beside him. She had stopped shivering, but she was still weak. The medicine had helped, but she needed real medical care. David exhaled slowly. I need to get her out of here. His comm device was dead. His team had already evacuated. The only way to safety was to move, fast and smart. Aya stirred, her violet eyes opening slightly. She looked at him, her small hands clutching the fabric of his uniform. She was afraid, but she trusted him. David gave her a small nod. We're getting out of here, kid. Stay close, and don't make a sound. Aya blinked, then nodded weakly. David scanned the bunker. It had been an old military outpost, likely abandoned when the war moved elsewhere. There had to be another way out, a back entrance or a vent. He stood up, keeping his rifle ready, and moved deeper into the bunker. Aya followed slowly, her steps unsteady. The air was stale, filled with dust and the scent of rusted metal. The walls had cracks, and the floor was littered with debris. It was clear that no one had been here for years. After a few minutes of searching, David found a hatch covered in dust. He crouched down and wiped the surface clean. It led underground. He pressed his ear against it. Silence. No sign of movement below. This might be our way out, he muttered. He turned to Aya. We're going down. It'll be dark, but I'll be right with you. Aya hesitated, gripping his sleeve. He could see fear in her eyes, fear of the unknown. David softened his voice. Hey, you trust me, right? Aya stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. Good. Let's go. David pulled the hatch open with a creak. A metal ladder extended downward into darkness. He slung his rifle across his back, grabbed the ladder, and started climbing. Aya followed, gripping the rungs tightly. As soon as they reached the bottom, David pulled out a small flashlight and scanned the area. It was a maintenance tunnel, narrow, damp, and stretching far into the distance. The air was musty, but there was no immediate danger. We keep moving, David said. Stay close. Aya nodded, her small feet barely making a sound as they walked. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper underground. The further they went, the quieter it became. The sounds of the beasts outside had faded completely. David kept his pace steady, his eyes scanning for any danger. The war had left many places like this, forgotten and abandoned. Suddenly, Aya stopped. She tugged on his sleeve, pointing ahead. David followed her gaze. His flashlight revealed something metallic in the distance. A door. Hope flickered in his chest. If it led outside, they had a chance. He approached carefully, testing the handle. It was stuck. Stand back, he told Aya. He planted his foot against the door and kicked. Bang. The rusted metal groaned and gave way, revealing a control room. David stepped inside cautiously, his rifle ready. The room was dimly lit by emergency lights, and old monitors flickered with static. Aya looked around in wonder, her large eyes filled with curiosity. David scanned the consoles. Most were dead, but one screen displayed a map of the area. His eyes locked onto a landing zone, a possible extraction point. If I can get a signal out, he murmured, his fingers moving over the dusty controls. Aya watched him, her head tilted in confusion. After a few minutes, static buzzed in his earpiece. Then, "This is Bravo Command. Identify yourself." David's heart leaped. It worked. "This is Sergeant Carter, stranded in enemy territory. I have an injured civilian with me, requesting immediate evac. Silence. Then, copy that, Sergeant. A transport ship is en route. ETA 15 minutes. Relief washed over him. They were getting out. He turned to Aya and gave her a small smile. We're going home, kid. Aya didn't fully understand his words, but she understood his tone. She smiled. Weak, but real. David secured his rifle and moved to the door. Let's get to the surface before they arrive. Aya took his hand, and together, they stepped forward, toward hope. David Carter adjusted his grip on his rifle as he guided Aya through the underground tunnel. The faint glow from his flashlight barely illuminated the way, but it was enough to keep moving. His heartbeat was steady now. They had a way out. The control room's transmission had worked. Help was coming. A transport ship was on its way, but they needed to reach the surface before it arrived. Aya, the little alien girl, clutched his sleeve tightly, her small feet barely making a sound as she followed him. She was exhausted, but she kept moving. David glanced down at her. She's tough. Any human child in her condition would have collapsed by now. But she didn't complain, didn't stop. They turned a corner, and David saw a rusted metal ladder leading up. He tested the rungs. Still stable. We're climbing, he told Aya. I'll go first. You follow right after me, okay? Aya hesitated, her violet eyes flickering with uncertainty. David knelt and softened his voice. It's okay, kid. I won't let anything happen to you. She took a deep breath and nodded. David slung his rifle across his back and started climbing. The metal creaked beneath his weight, but it held. Aya followed closely, her small fingers gripping the cold rungs. At the top, David pressed against the hatch. It wouldn't budge. Rust and time had sealed it shut. He gritted his teeth, adjusted his position, and with a powerful shove, crack, the hatch burst open, sending a cloud of dust into the air. David pulled himself out and scanned the area. They were outside. The sky was dark, lit only by the eerie glow of distant fires from the abandoned battlefield. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth. The jungle beyond was dense, shadows shifting between the trees. Aya climbed out after him, coughing slightly from the dust. David took a deep breath. They were so close. He checked his watch. 10 minutes until evac. Then he heard it. A low growl. His body tensed. He turned slowly, and his stomach dropped. The scavenger beasts had found them. 3 of the creatures stood at the edge of the jungle, their yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. Their bodies were thin but muscular, covered in dark fur, with long claws that scraped against the dirt. They had been hunting Aya before. Now, they had found both of them. David pushed Aya behind him, raising his rifle. Stay close, don't move, he whispered. The beasts lowered their heads, growling deep in their throats. They were testing him. David knew how this worked. Predators only attacked if they thought they could win. He had to make them believe it wasn't worth the fight. He widened his stance, keeping his rifle aimed at the largest one. A tense silence filled the air. Then, the lead beast lunged. David pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet struck the creature's shoulder, knocking it back with a snarl. The others hesitated, growling in frustration. David didn't wait. He grabbed Aya's hand and ran. The jungle was thick, branches whipping against his arms as they pushed through. The beasts roared behind them, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. David's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them forever. They were faster, built for hunting. 5 minutes until evac. Come on, kid, we're almost there, he said, breathless. Aya was panting, struggling to keep up, but she didn't let go of his hand. Then, up ahead, a clearing. David's heart leaped. The landing zone. A faint light flickered in the sky. The transport ship approaching. But the beasts were closing in. He could hear their growls right behind them. No choice. David whirled around, dropping to one knee and raising his rifle. Bang! Bang! The gunfire echoed through the trees. One of the creatures stumbled, howling in pain. The other hesitated, just for a moment. That was all David needed. He grabbed Aya, sprinting toward the clearing. The transport ship's engines roared above them, its lights blinding against the darkness. A voice crackled in his earpiece. "Sergeant Carter, we see you. Hold your position." David skidded to a stop, shielding Aya as the ship descended. A hatch opened, and two soldiers rushed out, weapons ready. The beasts hesitated at the edge of the clearing, growling. One of the soldiers fired a warning shot. The creature snarled but finally backed away, disappearing into the jungle. David let out a shaky breath. They made it. The soldiers reached them. "You okay, Sergeant?" David nodded, exhausted. "Yeah, but the kid needs medical attention." Aya clung to his arm, her small body trembling. But when she looked up at him, there was something else in her eyes. Hope. David scooped her up and stepped onto the transport. The hatch closed, sealing them inside. For the first time in days, he let himself relax. Aya was safe, and no matter what happened next, he wasn't leaving her behind. David Carter sat on the metal bench inside the transport ship, his rifle resting across his lap. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but his attention was on the small alien girl beside him. Aya clung to his sleeve, her violet eyes wide, as she took in her new surroundings. She had never been inside a human ship before. Everything felt unfamiliar, but David's presence made her feel safe. A medic knelt in front of her, scanning her with a handheld device. "She's malnourished, dehydrated, and has a few bruises, but nothing too serious," the medic said. David let out a relieved breath. "She'll be okay." The medic nodded. "With some food, water, and rest. Yes, she's tougher than she looks." Aya blinked up at David, as if waiting for his reaction. He gave her a small nod. "See, you're gonna be fine, kid." She didn't say anything, but she relaxed slightly. David leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. They had made it. They had escaped the jungle, survived the scavenger beasts, and now they were on their way back to base. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over yet. Something still felt wrong. The ship rumbled as it moved through the atmosphere. The pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "Entering orbit. We'll reach base in 20 minutes." David exhaled, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping into his gut. Then, alarms blared. Red warning lights flashed. The pilot's voice came through again, this time tense. "Enemy fighters incoming. We've been spotted." David's heart pounded. Not now. The ship tilted sharply as the pilot tried to maneuver. Aya yelped, grabbing onto David's arm. "Hold on," he shouted, wrapping an arm around her to keep her steady. Through the small window, he saw them. 3 alien fighter ships. They were sleek, dark, and fast. Hostile forces, the same ones who had wiped out Aya's village. David gritted his teeth. They must have been watching. They saw the human ship land, saw the rescue, and now they wanted to make sure neither he nor Aya escaped. The ship shook violently as enemy fire hit the outer hull. "Shields at 50%. The co-pilot called out. "Returning fire," another soldier said, manning the ship's turret. David knew this was bad. Their transport ship wasn't built for combat. They needed to escape fast. He turned to the medic. "Strap her in." The medic nodded, securing Aya into a seat with safety restraints. She looked at David with fear in her eyes, but he squeezed her hand. "I promise I won't let them take you." Then, he grabbed his rifle and moved toward the cockpit. The pilot was sweating as he pushed the ship into evasive maneuvers. "We can't outrun them for long." David scanned the controls. His mind worked fast. If they couldn't run, they had to fight. "Divert all power to the rear shields," David ordered. "Let them think we're defenseless. Then, when they get close, hit them hard." The pilot hesitated, then nodded. Understood. The ship jerked as another blast hit the shields. The enemy fighters were closing in. They saw the weak spot. They were going for the kill. David gripped the co-pilot's chair, watching the radar. Wait for it. The fighters locked on. Now, David shouted. The ship suddenly reversed power, shifting all energy to the forward cannons. The soldier on the turret fired. A direct hit. One enemy fighter exploded in a burst of flames. The other two hesitated, but only for a second. David grabbed the radio. This is Sergeant Carter, requesting immediate backup. We have a child on board and are under attack. Static. Then, a reply. Reinforcements inbound. Hold your position. David clenched his jaw. They just needed to survive a little longer. The ship jolted again. Another enemy blast rocked them. Shields at 20%, the pilot warned. David ran back to Aya. She was shaking, her small hands gripping the straps of her seat. Are we going to die? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. David crouched down, looking her straight in the eyes. Not today, kid. Then, a bright light outside. The reinforcements had arrived. A squad of human fighter jets swooped in, engaging the enemy ships. The sky became a battlefield, lasers and explosions lighting up the darkness. David held Aya close as the transport ship veered away from the fight. The radio crackled again. You're clear. Get the kid to safety. David let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. They had won. Aya buried her face in his chest, her tiny hands clutching his uniform. For the first time, she whispered, "Thank you." David smiled, stroking her head. No matter what happened next, he would keep his promise. They were going home. The transport ship landed smoothly on the military base, its engines humming as the landing ramp extended. The moment the doors opened, David Carter unstrapped Aya and lifted her into his arms. The little alien girl clung to him tightly, her small hands gripping his uniform. Around them, soldiers and medics rushed to unload supplies and assist the wounded. The battle in the skies had ended, but David knew the war was far from over. A female officer approached, her sharp green eyes scanning them. "Sergeant Carter." David nodded. "That's me." She glanced at Aya, who buried her face against his chest. Frightened by all the noise and unfamiliar faces, "Command wants a full report on your mission," the officer said. David exhaled. "The girl comes first. She needs food, water, and medical care." The officer hesitated, then signaled a medic. "Take her to the medical wing. Make sure she's checked properly." David turned to Aya and gently pulled her hands from his uniform. "You're safe now, kid," he whispered. Aya looked up at him with uncertain eyes. "You're coming back." David ruffled her messy silver hair. "I promise." She nodded slowly, letting the medic take her hand. As she disappeared into the base, David turned back to the officer. "All right, let's talk." The briefing room. Inside the command center, David stood before a large table filled with senior officers. A holographic map displayed the jungle region where he had found Aya. "You disobeyed orders," one officer said. "Your mission was reconnaissance, not rescue." David clenched his fists. "I wasn't going to leave a child to die." Another officer tapped on the table, bringing up images of destroyed alien villages. "We've confirmed that her people were targeted by an unknown force. We suspect it's the same enemy faction that attacked our ship." David crossed his arms. "And now they know we have her." The room fell silent. A general leaned forward. "That makes her a risk, Sergeant. If the enemy is after her, keeping her here might bring danger to this base." David's jaw tightened. "She's just a kid. She might be a target." Silence again. David took a slow breath. He knew the officers had a point. The enemy had been relentless in trying to stop them. They had even sent fighters after their ship. They weren't after just any survivor. They wanted Aya. Finally, the general spoke. For now, she stays, but we need to figure out why she's so important. David nodded. Then I'll protect her. The general studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Very well, Sergeant. She's your responsibility. David didn't hesitate. Understood. Aya's new home. David made his way to the medical wing, where Aya sat on a hospital bed, nibbling on a nutrition bar. She looked much better now, clean, dressed in soft clothes, and no longer trembling. The moment she saw him, her eyes lit up. You came back. David smirked. Told you I would. He sat beside her, watching as she carefully chewed her food. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Aya finally asked, Am I going to stay here? David nodded. For now, yeah. This base is safe. Aya looked down. What if the bad ones come? David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They won't get to you. Not while I'm here. She hesitated, then whispered, Why are you helping me? David thought about it. He had fought in many battles, seen destruction, and lost good people. But seeing Aya, alone and afraid, had sparked something in him. I guess, he said, because it's the right thing to do. Aya stared at him, then slowly smiled. Thank you, David. He smiled back. Get some rest, kid. We've got a lot to figure out. But deep inside, he knew. The real danger was still coming. David Carter sat on the edge of his cot in the barracks, staring at his boots. His mind was filled with the general's words from earlier. She might be a target. Aya, the little alien girl he had rescued, was no ordinary survivor. The enemy had chased them through the jungle, fired on their ship, and risked everything to get to her. But why? A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. The female officer from before, Lieutenant Reynolds, entered. Her expression was tense. We have a problem. David stood. What is it? She handed him a datapad. A surveillance report. Unidentified ships spotted near the base. No communication attempts. Just watching. David's grip tightened. They found her. Reynolds nodded. High Command is considering evacuation. But there's more. Aya has been asking for you. Aya's secret. David rushed to the medical wing. Aya was sitting by the window, watching the night sky. Her silver hair reflected the soft lights of the room. She turned when she saw him. David. He knelt beside her. What's wrong, kid? She hesitated, then took his hand. I remember now. Why they're after me. David stayed silent, letting her speak. My father, he was a leader. He had something they wanted. Before they attacked, he gave it to me. She touched her chest. It's inside me. David's eyes widened. What is it? Aya shook her head. I don't know, but they think it's powerful. David exhaled sharply. That's why they wiped out your village. Why they chased us. Aya nodded. And they won't stop. David knew she was right. If they didn't act, the enemy would come. And this time, they wouldn't just watch. Preparing for battle. David stormed into the war room. We need to move her. The general frowned. That's exactly what they're expecting. David clenched his fists. So we just wait for them to strike. Reynolds spoke up. There might be another way. She pulled up a map. There's an old underground bunker 2 miles from here. If we move her there, we can set a trap. The general nodded slowly. It's risky. David smirked. Risk is what we do best. The ambush. In the dead of night, a convoy moved out. David sat with Aya in the armored vehicle, keeping her close. She shivered. I'm scared. He squeezed her hand. I won't let anything happen to you. Suddenly, a bright explosion lit up the sky. The enemy had arrived. Gunfire erupted as alien ships descended, their forces pouring out. But the soldiers were ready. Trenches, turrets, and hidden explosives turned the battlefield into chaos. David pulled Aya out of the vehicle, running for cover. Stay close. Enemy soldiers charged toward them. David fired. taking down 2 before ducking behind a barricade. Aya covered her ears, trembling. David. He grabbed her wrist. We're almost there. Through smoke and fire, they reached the bunker entrance. David slammed the emergency controls, sealing the door behind them. Aya was panting, tears in her eyes. Are we safe? David checked his rifle. Not yet. The final confrontation. The loud bang echoed through the bunker. The enemy was trying to break in. David turned to Aya. If they get through. Aya shook her head. They can't have it. She took his hands, her small fingers trembling. David, if I don't make it. He stopped her. Don't say that. We get out of this. Together. A deafening crash. The door burst open. An alien warrior stepped forward, towering over them. His eyes locked on Aya. Give us what belongs to us. David raised his rifle. Over my dead body. The alien smirked. That can be arranged. A fight broke out. David dodged, rolled, and fired. But the warrior was fast. A powerful strike sent David crashing against the wall. Aya screamed. David. The alien grabbed her wrist. It's time to end this. Aya closed her eyes. And then, light. A golden glow burst from her chest, blinding everyone. The warrior stumbled back, screaming. The energy pulsed outward, shaking the bunker. David shielded his eyes. Aya? When the light faded, the alien warrior was gone. Nothing remained. Aya collapsed into David's arms, weak but breathing. It's over, she whispered. David held her close. Yeah, kid. It's over. A new beginning. Days later, Aya stood beside David, watching the sunrise over the base. The battle was won. The enemy had retreated. She looked up at him. What happens now? David smiled. You start a new life. Aya hesitated. Will I be alone? David knelt. You'll never be alone. You have us now. She hugged him tightly. Thank you. David ruffled her hair. Come on, kid. Let's go home. And for the first time in a long time, Aya truly felt safe.